Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When a quiet rancher refuses to yield his land, a battle ignites between private legacy and a ruthless HOA's eco-utopia vision. Bulldozers, drones, and dirty politics collide in a true modern land war. One man stands in the way, and he's not backing down. The morning started like most do out here, quiet, cold, and stubbornly beautiful. The kind of cold that crawls into your bones, no matter how many layers you've got on, and the kind of beauty that makes you forget there's a world outside your fence line trying to implode every 5 minutes. I stood on the porch of my ranch house with a steaming mug of black coffee, staring across the frozen ridges of pine-covered hills that roll like waves across the northern edge of the property. 1,500 acres of land, passed down to me from my old man. Some of it worked, most of it wild, all of it mine. My son Caleb, 14 and full of untamed fire, was down by the barn helping a couple of the veterans muck out the stalls. We run a small private agri-training school for returning vets. Real salt-of-the-earth folks, men and women who've been through more than I ever will. I don't do it for show or sympathy or for whatever buzzword nonprofits are selling this month. I do it because my dad was one of them. He fought in Vietnam, then built this place from nothing with 2 hands and a broken back. What we've got here is sacred. Every inch of dirt, every fence post, every field. So you can imagine the tone in my voice when I opened that envelope. It was a Tuesday morning when the letter came. Unmarked envelope, hand-delivered, with an HOA seal printed on a heavy cardstock insert. That already pissed me off. We're not part of any damn HOA. We live adjacent to a high-end development called Aspen Dominion Estates, a fortress of manicured lawns and interchangeable white Range Rovers. But my property line is a hard boundary. No shared utilities, no easements, no cross-access roads, nothing. Legally, they've got as much say over my land as a New Yorker does over the moon. I skimmed the letter, then read it again, and then, for good measure, read it a 3rd time because I thought maybe someone slipped mescaline into my coffee. Notice of intent to reappropriate land for community benefit. It accused me, by name, of possessing unutilized, dormant land with potential for high-impact community development. According to them, 1,200 acres of my land, the hilly, forested, steep terrain on the North Ridge, was currently neglected and would be better used for a mixed-purpose green corridor, including public walking trails, a community garden, and, this was the kicker, a proposed Veterans Resource Village. I had to sit down. They even had the balls to claim they were acting under the authority of a shared jurisdiction development statute, as if some HOA could co-opt state law to just carve up my goddamn property like it was a leftover brisket. The signature at the bottom was one I didn't recognize. Karen Wilkes, President, Aspen Dominion Estates Homeowners Association. I did some digging. Karen Wilkes was a recent arrival, moved in less than 6 months ago, but had already risen to the top of the HOA, like a tick finds the warmest part of a dog's neck. Former sociology professor, big on public policy theory. Wrote a book no one read about democratic redistribution of private green space. I guess she figured that since I wasn't putting roller coasters or organic boutiques on my back 40, I must be wasting it. I didn't respond to the letter. Didn't even dignify it with a phone call. Instead, I sent a scanned copy to my attorney, scrawled across it in Sharpie. They have lost their fucking minds. A week went by, then 2. No follow-up. I figured that was that. Maybe Karen got the message through legal silence. Or maybe she realized her HOA didn't have jurisdiction past the edge of her ornamental koi pond. I've dealt with entitled neighbors before. Usually, a strong property line, a posted sign, and a no-nonsense sheriff were enough to keep them where they belonged. Then came the press release. Someone forwarded me an article from a community blog. It quoted Karen directly, announcing the HOA's groundbreaking initiative to reclaim underused wilderness for public benefit. They included maps, low-res satellite images with a red overlay that unmistakably covered my land. They talked about ecological restoration and veteran outreach, as if I hadn't been doing that on my own land for years without asking the government for a single dime. There was even a photo of her standing at the HOA clubhouse, smiling under a banner that read, "Land for the people, not for profit." That night, I called Maya Feldman, my land use attorney. "Are they serious?" I asked, pacing the kitchen while Caleb sat in the corner pretending not to listen. "They're bluffing," Maya said. This smells like a political stunt. They've got no statutory authority outside their HOA boundaries. Then why send me a legal notice? To rattle you, to see if you'll budge. If you respond, they'll push harder. I looked out the window at the dark ridgeline, black silhouettes of trees standing guard like they had since before I was born. I'm not budging, I said. Good, Maya replied. Just be ready. People like her don't like to be ignored. She was right. A few days later, I found a printed flyer on my truck windshield while I was in town getting feed. It was from the Aspen Dominion HOA. Headline, Help Us Unlock Public Land. Beneath that, in bold red letters, one landowner stands in the way. My name wasn't printed, but there was a map. And the map showed my property line in full detail. It started with a sound, not coyotes. Not the usual wind howling through the pine trees. This was low and metallic, steady like a heartbeat made of steel. I was splitting firewood near the equipment shed when I heard it, something mechanical crawling up from the southern ridge. At first, I figured maybe one of the veterans had taken the tractor out without telling me. Then the ground started to hum beneath my boots. I dropped the axe and jogged up the hill. And there it was. A goddamn bulldozer crawling across my land like it belonged there. Behind it trailed a convoy, a utility truck with fencing gear, a boxy green SUV with magnetic HOA logos on the doors, and two more vehicles loaded with wood, tarps, and plastic signs. There were men in matching jackets, unloading gear and staking orange flags into the frozen ground like they were surveying territory during a war. I froze for a second. My brain couldn't keep up with what my eyes were screaming. Then I started moving. By the time I reached them, a woman in a navy parka and white gloves was already barking instructions at the workers. She turned as I approached, and I recognized her immediately from the photo in the blog post. Karen Wilkes. She smiled like a school principal catching a kid skipping class. "Mr. Vale," she said, "so glad you could join us. We're finally breaking ground." I looked past her at the sign two men were hammering into the dirt. Community Green Corridor, Phase 1, a project of Aspen Dominion Estates HOA. There was a QR code at the bottom. I imagined it linked to some donation page for brainwashed suburbanites who thought planting tomatoes on someone else's land counted as activism. "You're trespassing," I said, voice flat. "All of you. This is private property." Karen's smile widened like I had said something cute. "No, Mr. Vale. This land has been designated as a shared impact zone under the Colorado Integrated Use Encouragement Statute." The what? She handed me a laminated document that looked like it had been run through a legal thesaurus 12 times. At the top, Notice of Interim Development Authority for non-utilized parcels pending assessment. "It's meaningless," I said, handing it back. "This land isn't part of your HOA. You have no jurisdiction here." "That's the thing," she said, stepping closer. "This isn't about HOA jurisdiction. This is about community stewardship. We've initiated a transitional use claim through the county. It's temporary. Unless you object through official channels, we're authorized to proceed." That last part made my stomach drop. "Unless I object." "Don't worry," she added, gesturing behind her. "We're starting with just a section of the north slope. It's barely accessible anyway, but we'll be building trails, a public gathering space, and a veterans tribute garden. Thought you might appreciate that last bit." I stared at her, trying not to let the fury boil over. "You're building a tribute garden for veterans," I said slowly, "on land that I already used to train actual veterans, men and women who put more on the line than you've ever risked in your life. And you're doing it by bringing a bulldozer onto my property without permission?" "We're doing it for the people, Mr. Vale," she said. "Not everyone gets to hoard this kind of space. You're sitting on over 1,000 acres. That's selfish. It's time to share." She turned and walked away like she had just won a damn debate. I took out my phone and called the sheriff's office. It took almost an hour before Deputy Sullivan arrived. He knew me, used to hunt with my dad, had dinner at our place back when my wife was alive. I explained the situation, showed him the deed, the cadastral maps, and a copy of the original land grant. He nodded, took it all in, and then walked over to talk to Karen. They spoke quietly for a while. Karen handed him the same laminated document she gave me. He made a show of reading it, then came back to me, rubbing the back of his neck. "She's saying they're acting under county development provisions," he said. "Some sort of shared access claim filed last week. Apparently, it gives temporary use rights pending review." "Review of what?" "Land utility. They're claiming the land is dormant." I'm not saying they're right, but if they filed something official with the county. It's not dormant, I snapped. It's rugged terrain, forest, pasture, wildlife corridors. I've got goats up in the northern paddock right now. This is a working ranch. I hear you, Sullivan said, but I'm stuck, Lar. This looks like a civil matter, not a criminal one. If you want to stop them, it's got to go through court. Of course it did. By the time the deputy left, the workers had already cleared a 100-yard strip of brush and saplings and were digging shallow trenches for what looked like planting beds. A cameraman showed up, local news. Karen stood in front of the bulldozer and gave a speech about reclaiming forgotten land and liberating nature from private bondage. She actually said that. I stood off to the side with my arms crossed, watching her pose in front of my goddamn pine trees, while a reporter nodded along like she was the second coming of Teddy Roosevelt. One of the veterans, Nate, ex-Army Ranger, tough as they come, walked up beside me. "You want us to do something?" he asked quietly. I shook my head. "Not yet." He glanced at the men hammering signs into the dirt. "Feels like they're planting a flag." "They are," I said, "but this isn't war." Nate smiled without humor. "Looks like an invasion from here." I didn't sleep that night. Neither did my dogs. They paced the house like something was coming through the walls. I kept checking the window, waiting to see more trucks, more signs, more cameras. Nothing came, but I knew it was only the beginning. Because Karen didn't just knock on the door and ask nicely. She'd brought the bulldozer. By the end of the week, my land looked like the set of a cheap environmental documentary. They hadn't left. In fact, they'd multiplied. Where I used to see nothing but open ridgeline and pine groves, there were now vinyl banners flapping in the wind, staked into my soil like gravestones. Logos of Aspen Dominion Estates, HOA, were everywhere. On signs, pop-up tents, even the t-shirts of 20-somethings handing out flyers to passing hikers like we were hosting a damn music festival. They weren't just intruding anymore. They were branding. A massive banner stood right at the ridge entrance. Aspen Future Commons, bringing land back to the people. Underneath it, in smaller letters, Phase 1, sponsored by the office of Senator Grayson Mortlow. That name stopped me cold. Mortlow was a senior senator, practically royalty in Colorado politics. He wasn't just some talking head. He sat on 3 environmental oversight committees and had a reputation for pushing through eco-social zoning reform. And apparently now, he was publicly endorsing the theft of my land. Great. But it got worse. One of the veterans, Julia, came into the barn with her phone shaking in her hand. "You need to see this," she said. She showed me the HOA's new public campaign page, professionally made and full of corporate buzzwords. Aspen Future Commons, a grassroots movement to convert neglected private land into shared ecological and humanitarian resources. The page included aerial drone footage taken illegally over my property, showing the northern hills captioned "Dormant, Land Awaiting Transformation." They'd even posted a time-lapse video of the bulldozer clearing the first trench, set to uplifting music, with a voiceover from Karen. This is what it means to reclaim space. To challenge outdated ideas of land ownership, to create something for everyone. Below the video was a donation portal. The goal? $125,000 to fund initial development and educational outreach. They'd already raised over 30. My blood went ice cold. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a mistake or a misinterpretation of jurisdiction. This was a deliberate public campaign, complete with marketing, legal cover, and now, political sponsorship. They were laundering theft through nonprofit language and calling it progress. That afternoon, I drove down to the lower ridge to check the damage. The trail cutting crew had expanded. I counted 5 new workers, all wearing HOA-issued reflective vests, digging out a switchback path across my slope. A new wooden structure, some kind of trailhead kiosk, was half-built, complete with a plexiglass donation box already collecting crumpled bills. A young woman with a clipboard saw me and cheerfully approached. "Hi, are you here to volunteer?" I stared at her. She paused. "Oh, are you media?" "I'm the guy who owns this land." Her smile cracked just slightly. "Oh, I think you need to talk to Karen. She's at the community welcome tent." Of course she was. I walked up the hill and found Karen seated beneath a white canopy, sipping herbal tea like she was hosting a wedding. A portable table held printed pamphlets, HOA branded tote bags, and even a stack of little seed packets labeled "Plant a New Future." She spotted me and didn't even flinch. "Mr. Vale," she said brightly, "we're making amazing progress." I think the response has been incredibly positive. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I said. "You've got a public donation campaign. You're filming my land without permission. You've got volunteers building infrastructure on private property. You've dragged in a United States senator, and you're collecting money off it." Karen took a calm sip of her tea. "Everything we're doing is fully transparent and backed by provisional land use policy under County Statute 43C. We're currently operating under a transitional designation. No final transfer has occurred. Yet." She added that last word like a scalpel. "You're going to jail," I said flatly. "You know that, right? You're trespassing. You've tampered with property. You've publicly defamed me as a land-hoarding obstacle to the community." Karen didn't blink. "Oh, Larson, you're still thinking in terms of property lines. But this is bigger than you. It's about precedent. Change. When this works, it'll be the model." She stood and gestured toward the volunteers below. "Look at them. Students, teachers, retirees. Don't you see what we're building here?" I didn't answer. I just turned and walked away. My hands were shaking. That night, I pulled every camera I had from the barn, the house, and the training shed. I installed them along the northern fence line and mounted 2 motion-triggered trail cams in the woods. If they were going to build something on my land, I'd document every goddamn inch of it. Next morning, one of the cameras caught something interesting. At 6:43 a.m., a group of HOA volunteers gathered at the new donation station. A man in a blazer, not one of the local crew, showed up in a black SUV. They handed him a USB drive, shook hands. He got back in and drove off. I paused the video. The SUV had state Senate plates. I called Maya before the sun was up. By the time her coffee kicked in, I had already emailed her 2 gigs of footage. Bulldozers trespassing, unauthorized construction, the senator's SUV, drone flyovers, donation booths, banners, volunteers trampling my pasture. It was more than enough to get her attention. "Jesus, Larson," she muttered after 10 minutes of silent scrolling. "This isn't just a property dispute. This is a campaign. They're staging a hostile PR seizure and hoping you'll get overwhelmed before the courts catch up. Then let's make sure the courts catch up." She didn't waste time. Maya filed an emergency cease and desist, sent formal trespass notifications to the HOA's legal office, and initiated a records request to the County Land Commission. Meanwhile, I kept filming. Every post, every volunteer, every drone buzzing above the tree line, I cataloged it all. Then came the breakthrough. Maya's paralegal dug into Aspen Future Commons, the nonprofit Karen had used to funnel donations for the Green Corridor. It had been formed just 2 months prior, with a shell address registered to a commercial mailbox in Denver. More interesting, the registered agent listed for tax purposes was a man named Caleb Raines. I knew that name, not because he was famous, but because his name was etched into a brass plate on the wall of the Aspen Dominion Clubhouse, in honor of Professor Caleb Raines, mentor, builder, visionary, Karen's former student. He wasn't just involved, he was on the board of directors. And now he sat on the county's zoning advisory committee, the same committee that had quietly accepted the temporary shared use proposal for my land without ever notifying me. My jaw clenched so hard I nearly cracked a molar. Maya was livid. She built this entire operation from the inside, stacked the board, fabricated a nonprofit, used her student as a foothold in the zoning office, and she's funneling public donations into a private project while using you as the unwilling poster child for it. We decided it was time to take it public. I reached out to a few friends in town, store owners, old ranchers, a retired judge who used to play poker with my dad. We wrote an open letter outlining exactly what was happening, how the HOA was illegally building on private land, raising money off of stolen footage, and threatening the sanctity of private property rights under the banner of community development. We published it online, included maps and drone images, and launched a petition. Within 2 days, it had over 15,000 signatures. Local news stations picked it up first, then regional ones. Then a Denver podcast did a full feature, calling the whole thing a 21st century land grab disguised as progress. I started getting emails, veterans, farmers, landowners from other states, all of them saying the same thing. "This has to stop. We're with you." But Karen wasn't backing down. In fact, she doubled down. The very next day, volunteers from Aspen Future Commons plastered flyers around town. Big glossy posters with my face, taken from one of the drone shots, and bold red text, One man stands in the way of progress. Don't let selfishness win. Below that, smaller text. Aspen Dominion believes in shared space, sustainable futures, and equitable access to land. Don't let outdated ideas of ownership destroy opportunity for all. I ripped the first one down with my bare hands. Then I found 4 more stapled to trees near the local grocery store. A reporter from a left-leaning magazine called me for a statement. I told him the truth. You want land reform? Fine. Let's start with city golf courses and university endowments. Leave my ranch alone. Karen went on a podcast the next day. Calm, collected, smug as hell. This is not about taking, she said. This is about reimagining, about using space ethically. And yes, sometimes ethical use requires bold moves. The hosts ate it up, but the tide was turning. People were starting to ask questions. Why a private HOA was building trails on land they didn't own, where the donations were really going. Why a U.S. senator had shown up without a word to the press. And then came the text from Maya. Found something. You're going to want to see this. We need to talk. In person. I didn't know it yet, but she had just found the match to light the whole thing on fire. I found the camera completely by accident. It was a crisp, brittle morning. The kind where everything snaps under your boots, and even the sunlight feels like a lie. I was out with Caleb and 2 of the vets, Nate and Julia, checking fencing along the northwest ridge. It wasn't part of the property we used often, too steep for grazing, too wild for tractors. But ever since Karen's bulldozers started sniffing around the perimeter like wolves, I made a habit of walking every fence line myself. We were halfway through the tree line when Nate stopped dead in his tracks. Hey, he said, pointing up into a ponderosa. That birdhouse look new to you? It was wedged about 10 feet up, nailed into the trunk. Fresh wood. No weathering. But more than that, it was facing inward toward the ranch. Not the trail, not the ridge, toward us. Julia narrowed her eyes and muttered, "That's not a birdhouse." She scrambled up with the speed of someone who used to climb into bombed-out buildings for a living and pried the thing loose with her multi-tool. When she came back down, she opened it right there on the dirt. Inside wasn't seed or straw. It was a camera, covert grade, weatherproofed, with a battery pack and a motion sensor, wired, active. There was no doubt about it. Someone had installed surveillance on my land. My jaw locked so tight I thought I'd snap a molar. "Karen," I growled. We followed the cable buried in the pine needles, careful not to disturb anything. It ran nearly 20 yards before disappearing into a shallow pit lined with camo netting and brush. Underneath was a portable station, a foldable case with antennae, a solar panel, and a basic signal transmitter. Julia gave a low whistle. This isn't amateur hour. This is ops-level gear. We disabled the setup and hauled the whole mess back to the barn. I stashed it in my locked tool room, took photos from every angle, and immediately called Maya. She drove out that same night with a digital forensics guy she knew from a past case. While he started pulling data, Maya stood in my kitchen, looking more furious than I'd ever seen her. "This is criminal," she said. "Straight up illegal surveillance. If we can prove they planted this, and we will, it's a felony." I was staring out of the window at the hills. "They're watching my family, my son." She nodded. "They crossed the line. Now we drag them over it." But that wasn't the end of it. Not even close. 2 nights later, Julia was out walking the property near the lower field. Her PTSD doesn't let her sleep, and she likes to patrol when it's quiet. She came pounding on my front door just before midnight, pale and out of breath. "There's movement on the west border," she said. 4 men, not trespassing deep, but they're armed. I saw weapons. I grabbed my shotgun and called the sheriff. Sullivan showed up fast. Too fast. And he wasn't alone. With him were 2 private security guys in tactical gear, wearing badges that read, Aspen Dominion Community Protection Division. "What the hell is this?" I asked. "They say they're contracted to protect the new development project," Sullivan muttered. "They claim they're staying on the HOA side of the boundary." I turned to them. "You're carrying weapons while patrolling private ranch land, and you're not law enforcement. That makes you trespassers with firearms." They said nothing, just stood there, staring like mall cops on steroids. Sullivan looked uncomfortable. "Lar, I don't like this any more than you do, but they're walking the line legally, as long as they stay on their side. Until they don't," I said. I followed up the next morning by marching into the county clerk's office and filing a formal complaint. Maya helped me draft the language. Unlawful surveillance. Trespassing with electronic equipment. unauthorized armed presence near private residence, harassment and intimidation tactics by an unlicensed entity, but the county dragged their feet. They said the evidence was under review and that the HOA claimed the equipment was part of an ecological monitoring initiative. Ecological my ass. Then Maya's forensics guy cracked the files on the transmitter. Among hundreds of motion-triggered clips, animals, branches, us walking the land, was a single audio snippet captured during setup. Karen's voice, clear, crisp. If he doesn't move, we just build it anyway. We set the structures. Once it's there, he won't be able to tear it down without looking like the villain. It's all psychology. I listened to it 5 times. Maya stared at me. She just confessed. We had her. I looked down at the device in my hand. The birdhouse. The wires, the battery pack. This wasn't about trails or gardens anymore. This was control, surveillance, coercion. They weren't just trying to take my land. They wanted to break me into giving it up. So I did the only thing that made sense. I called every news outlet that had ever left a voicemail, and I sent them everything. The story went national in less than 48 hours. I guess nothing gets people's attention like a rich HOA president installing spy cameras on a disabled vet's land while a U.S. senator quietly pockets donation money in the background. First, it was the Denver Journal, then the Colorado Tribune. Then the networks came calling. NBC, CNN, even some fringier watchdog channels that usually chase UFOs and corporate black sites. But this time, they were on to something real. The camera footage, the bulldozers, the armed patrols, the voice recording, it all hit at once. And the internet did what the internet does best. It exploded. People were livid. Social media lit up with hashtags like hashtag #HandsOffVeil, hashtag HOA Overreach, and my personal favorite, hashtag Karen Takes the Land. Memes circulated of Karen in military camo holding blueprints over a burning ranch. One TikTok edited her voice clip into a villain monologue set to dramatic music. I should have been disturbed. I wasn't. For the first time in months, I felt like I wasn't screaming into a void. Then came the knock on my door. It was Maya, with 2 other landowners behind her. One was an older woman named Roberta Vaughn, owned 200 acres near the southern part of the same ridge I did. The other was a soft-spoken cattleman named Eli Mendoza, whose property abutted the western edge of the Aspen Dominion expansion. Both had stories. Roberta had received the same kind of letter I had months ago. Hers marked as a request for easement collaboration. She'd ignored it and then found surveyor tape strung through her orchard. Eli? He'd been pressured by a development consultant tied to the HOA who offered to buy out his land at well below market rate, with the implication that if he refused, the county might reassess his zoning and restrict livestock rights. They'd stayed quiet, figured it was just pressure, a bluff, until they saw the news about me. We sat at my kitchen table and formed a plan. Maya filed a class action civil suit naming Karen Wilkes, the Aspen Dominion HOA, the Aspen Future Commons nonprofit, and, crucially, Senator Grayson Mortlow as co-defendants. The charge list was longer than a diner menu. Trespass, surveillance without consent, defamation, fraudulent misrepresentation, abuse of zoning procedure, conspiracy to defraud through nonprofit laundering, coercion of landowners, illegal, campaign financing for Mortlow. That last one lit the powder keg, because just as we were assembling our case, a freelance investigative reporter named Kamra Das from a political corruption blog called The Tally Ledger reached out to Maya. She had been tracking Mortlow's name through a chain of PACS, political action committees, and donor shells. Turns out Aspen Future Commons had funneled over $250,000, disguised as consulting payments and educational grants, into a PAC supporting Mortlow's re-election campaign. Worse, that PAC was tied to a luxury eco-development firm called High Pines DevCo, which had already submitted preliminary bids for land development on the ridge, including Roberta's and Eli's parcels. It was a web, and Karen was at the center. The moment Kamra published her piece, all hell broke loose. The Federal Election Commission opened a formal investigation into Mortlow's fundraising practices. The IRS began reviewing the tax status of Aspen Future Commons. And the DOJ announced a preliminary inquiry into land seizure under false pretenses. Karen tried to hold a press conference the next morning. It lasted 6 minutes. She showed up outside the Aspen Dominion clubhouse, flanked by a few remaining loyalists, mostly retirees who still believed she was building some utopian pasture commune. She tried to speak over the shouting reporters, but every camera zoomed in on her sweating upper lip. One journalist shouted, "Did you order illegal surveillance on Mr. Vale's property?" Another asked, "How much money did you funnel to Mortlow?" Karen froze, then muttered something about political sabotage before rushing back inside. Mortlow went silent. His press team issued a statement about baseless allegations fueled by disinformation, but within a day, screenshots leaked, emails between his office and Karen discussing optics management, public will manufacturing, and, most damningly, a line. Item called pre-dev leverage funds. Even his own party started backing away. And then came the best moment of the week. Maya called me, nearly breathless. "You watching the news?" I clicked it on. FBI agents were seen entering the HOA headquarters with warrants. Half an hour later, the same agents were photographed walking out with hard drives, donation ledgers, and boxes of labeled documents. One of them was marked Alt Acquisition Vale Parcel. Karen was not arrested that day, but it was clear the storm had turned. That night, I sat out on the porch with Caleb. He didn't say much, just stared at the stars, quiet like his mother used to be. Finally, he asked, "Is it over?" I shook my head. "No, not yet." But it was damn close. It didn't happen with sirens, no black helicopters, no CNN ticker tape blaring HOA president in cuffs. But when the moment came, it was still perfect. Karen Wilkes was arrested on a Tuesday morning in early May. I got the call from Maya, but by the time I picked up, my phone was already buzzing with texts, headlines, and grainy photos. There she was, standing in front of the Aspen Dominion clubhouse, still wearing that smug navy blue windbreaker, being handcuffed by 2 federal agents while an assistant tried desperately to hold her purse. The official charges were long. Wire fraud, unauthorized surveillance, misuse of nonprofit status, criminal trespass, conspiracy to commit zoning fraud, tax evasion, obstruction of justice, violation of the Landowner Protection Act. But for me, it all boiled down to one thing. She tried to steal my home, and now she was paying for it. The case exploded even further when Senator Grayson Mortlow was subpoenaed just days later. Under pressure from both federal and state investigators, he resigned from his chair position to focus on resolving ongoing legal matters. Translation: he lawyered up. Maya's team filed a motion to bring all charges under federal civil racketeering statutes, RICO, because this wasn't just a trespass or zoning violation. This was a coordinated operation involving political money, fake charities, land manipulation, and threats. In court, the evidence spoke louder than anything else. We had the surveillance camera, Exhibit A, the audio recording of Karen's voice, Exhibit B, the drone footage, the forged donation trail, the fraudulent applications to the zoning board, all of it meticulously laid out by Maya and her team. Even the HOA's internal documents, confiscated during the FBI raid, told the story in black and white. There was a PowerPoint file titled Reclamation Pathway Strategy that literally had my property outlined in red, marked Phase 1 Quiet Occupation. Another document listed timelines for building infrastructure prior to opposition litigation and talking points for reframing private land as communal resource. They were organized, they were insane, and they were done. Karen pled not guilty, of course, claimed she was acting in the interest of future generations. But that didn't fly with the judge, not when the prosecution rolled out email chains between her and Mortlow's campaign finance team discussing public sacrifice optics and manufactured consensus. During the third week of the trial, a whistleblower from the HOA board flipped. A man named Travis, Mild Mousy, the HOA's treasurer, testified that he was coerced into silence and that funds meant for community projects were funneled directly into Karen's personal accounts and passee contributions. He even had receipts, literal ones. One showed Karen buying a new kitchen remodel, $28,000, under a budget line labeled Eco Experience Center Demo Staging. The courtroom gasped. I didn't. I just stared at her. Karen didn't meet my eyes once during the entire trial, not when they played the surveillance audio, not when they described the armed security team stationed near my house, not when they showed her giving speeches over illegally cleared land with my goats grazing in the background. She sat still, jaw locked, a fallen queen watching her kingdom turn to ash. The jury came back fast, unanimous, guilty. Karen Wilkes was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for at least 8. She was also ordered to pay restitution to all landowners affected and stripped of any future nonprofit leadership rights for life. Mortlow was still under investigation at that point, but his fall was just beginning. The Senate Ethics Committee began proceedings, and leaks suggested a federal indictment was on the table. No one was backing him now. He was toxic, radioactive. I walked out of the courthouse with Caleb and the vets beside me. Reporters shouted questions, microphones shoved forward, cameras everywhere. I didn't say much, just one line, and it made every headline that night. Private land isn't a suggestion. It's a boundary, and boundaries matter. That was it. The rest was just noise. 6 months later, the signs were finally gone. No more banners flapping in the wind, no QR codes promising community redemption, no future commons kiosks asking for donations on stolen land. Just silence, just pine trees, the wind, and the wide, untamed ridgeline stretching out like it always had. Mine. The county officially dissolved the Aspen Dominion Estates HOA in early October. Turns out, once your entire leadership is either indicted or named in a federal class action lawsuit, the organization becomes inconvenient. Their assets were liquidated to cover court-ordered restitution. Their clubhouse was foreclosed and auctioned off. Ironically, it was bought by a former HOA member who turned it into a dog rescue. Can't make that up. The so-called eco-communal garden. Bulldozed. Soil samples showed it had been fertilized with low-grade runoff that violated half a dozen environmental codes. The trails were stripped, the kiosks dismantled, and the weird donation welcome center was converted into a firewood shed by one of the vets. I let him keep it. Small reward for a big headache. And as for my land, it's now protected under the Agricultural Heritage and Landowner Autonomy Act, a federal program recently expanded, largely because of our case. Maya pushed hard, and the wording in the final policy even references unlawful community-based encroachment attempts. In plain English, my land and every acre like it is now immune from HOA claims, jurisdictional overreach, or future zoning. Loopholes. It's not just protected, it's permanently designated as non-transferable ranch land under a trust I set up for Caleb. He'll inherit it when he turns 18, along with everything we've built. The animals, the agri-vet school, the fences, the history. And no one, not a Karen, not a senator, not a committee of board retirees, will ever touch it again. The vets stayed, not all of them, but most. Nate built an archery range near the creek. Julia turned one of the side barns into a greenhouse for hydroponics. We even got a small grant from a real nonprofit, one that didn't launder donations into granite countertops. Every now and then a tourist will stop at the edge of the old trail and ask, "Is this the place from the news?" I usually just nod. They always expect something dramatic, a plaque, a monument, but there's just a sign. Simple, wooden, no logos, no donations, no mission statements. It says, "Private land, do not enter. This is not a community project. This is a family's legacy." And below that, burned into the wood with Caleb's own hands, in memory of Ruth Vale, mother, teacher, wife. You kept it alive. She would have loved that. I still walk the ridge sometimes, just me, the dogs, and the cold sky. The quiet feels different now. Not empty, just earned. And every once in a while, I stop and think about the madness, the arrogance, the cameras, the lies, the war of paperwork and press releases. And I remind myself, property isn't about fences, it's about boundaries, and the right to draw them with your own hands.